Alive.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Nostalgia Goggles here on Full Metal Media. I'm your host again, Jeremy the Atom Adams, bringing you another awesome episode. That's right, this is the show where we always take a look back at our childhood, the movies we loved when we were a kid, and then we all kind of battle it out on whose childhood was better and whose movie better represents that time. So again, I'm Jeremy the Adams. I'm the Atom Adams. I'm here today, and the theme we're doing today is a little different. It's high school movies. That's right. We're growing it up a little bit. We're going back into those teen years, and I think there's so many movies you could choose that really spoke to us when we were kids in terms of the kids that we look up to in high school and all that kind of thing. So I think it's going to be fun. And with me today is my co-host, as always, is RJ at Red Ranger, Renee Villarreal. How are you doing today, RJ?
I'm good, man. I'm excited about this one, especially. Well, I don't know if you're going to reveal it a little bit later, but we're also doing something else a little different. So I'm excited about this one. I think this is going to be really fun.
Yeah. And then today, being our producer and running the show for us today, it's his first time with us. It's Brooklyn Vail. How are you doing today, Brooklyn?
Yeah, we're doing pretty good. You caught me on a free afternoon. Yeah, it's always great to be kind of in the background doing fact checking and stuff. And yeah, this should be really fun.
It is going to be fun. We're so glad to have you, and you get to enjoy the craziness as things usually go a little haywire on this show. So, all right. So to explain things again, what we do is we choose a movie from our childhood. The only rule is it has to have been rotten on Rotten Tomatoes, got pretty bad reviews, maybe not a huge hit when it came out, but it's something that's dear to our heart. And maybe we still love it, or maybe we loved it when we were a kid. Maybe we think different now. But yeah, we choose a movie. So again, today, the theme is high school movies. So I chose a movie from the 80s as always, because I'm from the 80s. And RJ chose a movie from the 90s. Oh, wait a second. Was April Fool's this week? RJ, am I not mistaken, or was April Fool's Day this week?
April Fool's was this past Sunday.
That's right. We're a little late. But yes, guys, this is the April Fool's episode, which means I today am Jeremy the 90s. The 90s Adam, Jeremy the 90s guy today, and RJ, believe it or not, is the 80s guy. That's right. I was originally had the idea we want to do something for different for April Fools, and I went to RJ and I said, RJ, why don't you pick an 80s movie? Pick an 80s movie that you love for once. And he took about 2 seconds, I think, thinking about the movie that he wanted. It came back to me, and the movie that he wanted was indeed a high school movie. And so I was in high school in the 90s, so there were a lot of high school movies I could pick. So here are the 2 movies we picked today. For RJ, 80s, RJ, red 80s guy, he picked the immortal Grease 2. That's right. Grease 2, the sequel from 1982. And I picked, originally I was going to pick a huge guilty pleasure, She's All That, starring Freddie Prinze Jr., but, I thought more of it, and I thought there's a movie that's really even closer to my heart and was a huge deal when I was in high school. And it's a movie that's maybe not known so much for the movie as it is for what came later, but I do really still have a soft spot for the movie, and that is 1992's Buffy the Vampire Slayer. That's right. If you don't know, it was a movie first from 1992, Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And then later on, 5 years later, actually, in 97, there was a TV show that was based on the same property. So those are our 2 movies today. The way we start is we're going to start with basically a description. So we're going to go in order today. We're going to start with the 80s. So RJ, tell me about Grease 2. What is this movie? Tell a little bit about the actors, the plot, and how this is a movie that represents the 80s.
Okay, so Grease 2, like you said, came out in 1992.
82.
Sorry. It's so hard.
I know.
All right. Yeah, directed by Patricia Birch. This movie takes place 2 years after the original, so this is the school year of 1961, I believe. I have to double check that.
61. Absolutely.
61. And in her first leading role, I actually did do my research.
You
have Michelle Pfeiffer, her first ever leading role in this movie. Along with it, also in the co-starring role, she is basically the Sandy of this movie. And then in the male leading role, oh God, why do I always forget his name?
I'm trying to remember too.
Man,
Maxwell
Maxwell Caulfield.
Caulfield.
I can never say it. Yes,
Yeah.
Maxwell Caulfield is in the Danny Zuko. However, just like our April Fools of switching places in this movie, you have Michelle Pfeiffer as the resident queen bee of the Pink Ladies, whereas Michael Caulfield, who is Sandy's cousin, is the foreign exchange student coming to America, and Michelle Pfeiffer's character. Wow, why do I forget their names all of a sudden?
It's okay.
I know his name's Michael. Her name is Stephanie.
Yeah.
Stephanie. And then a few other actors in there. Sorry, I have a really bad cough today.
That's okay. Adrian Zemed. Adrian Zemed is
yes. Adrian Zemed.
He's probably the other most important character.
He's basically the equivalent to what Danny Zuko should be in this movie. Yeah. For those of you who may recognize his name, if you're a big fan of Tom Hanks in the 80s, he played his best friend in Bachelor Party, which is where I know him from, and I love it. Another fun fact, Christopher McDonald is one of the T-Birds. 90s fans out there will know him as Shooter McGavin from Happy Gilmore.
It was killing me when I was watching it. I know who that is. Who is that? He looks so young. Kind of takes a minute.
Exactly. And then you have a couple of returning characters reprising their roles. Didi Khan comes back as Frenchie, who we know dropped out of high school in the original Grease. In this movie, she is coming back, I guess, to get her equivalent. She's never really clear. All she says is she's coming back to take chemistry. But to not ramble on for so much longer, basically in this movie, like I said, it is the character of Michael is infatuated with Stephanie. And it comes to a point where, as we learned from original Grease, you can only date a pink lady if you are a T-Bird. Yep. And in this movie, they're more specific of the only real way to be a T-Bird is to ride motorcycles. So he takes on this hidden persona, almost like a superhero of a biker. And he goes through the adventures of high school. There's side stories from the T-Birds and the Pink Ladies. Yeah. In the end, it's just a happy-go-lucky story about high school, love, friendship, all that hibbity-hoopla in the form of a musical.
Yeah. And just to kind of add a couple things, basically Grease came out in 78. It was a massive hit, and the studio, at that time was always trying to cash in on everything. You'd had a Jaws 2, you'd had a lot of sequels to huge hit movies, so they're like, we need a Grease 2. But as you probably know, Grease was based on a stage musical. There was no stage musical sequel or anything, so they basically had to invent one. So they created new songs and just created this whole movie out of thin cloth, basically to try to have a follow-up to Grease. Patricia Birch, who is the director, was the choreographer of the first Grease film, so she kind of stepped up and took the directing role. But unfortunately, they weren't able to get the original composers or songwriters from Grease, so they had a new team that wrote all new songs, and they came out in 82. So that's Grease 2. All right. And then again, the movie I chose, this one from 1992, is Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Now, give you a little bit of background. So there was a young buck in Hollywood. His name was Joss Whedon. He got started as a writer. He started in sitcoms, actually. His first major job was on Roseanne, the sitcom in the late 80s, early 90s. But the script that he had been shopping around to try to get made as a feature was indeed Buffy the Vampire Slayer, an original concept. And then finally in 1992, they made the film. It was directed by Fran Kazooie. Basically they took the script that he had and they kind of like turned it into a little more of a 90s kind of teen comedy with some vampire horror action elements to it. But it really is kind of really, for me, it fits in with a lot of the 90s movies like Clueless, later on with like Can't Hardly Wait, stuff like that. They're like funny, kind of jokey, satiric movies that kind of take shots at 90s teen culture. I think the movie is more that than it is like this story of Buffy and everything that we get later in the TV series. So the movie it stars Christy Swanson, not Sarah Michelle Gellar, but Christy Swanson, who was kind of an up-and-coming actress in the 90s. She was in a bunch more movies, a movie called The Chase with Charlie Sheen. And then the big draw, the one that they really tried to sell the movie on, was Luke Perry. He plays the kind of the male lead in the film. His character's name is Pike. And yeah, that he was on 90210, Beverly Hills 90210 at the time. So it was a big deal when they got him. And then the movie also has a great supporting cast with Donald Sutherland playing Merrick. That's right. Merrick is the original Watcher of Buffy that we get in this film. The character was portrayed a little differently in the TV series, but in the movie, he's just kind of this guy that we realize has been around for a really long time. And he kind of like almost seems like a hobo, but he's around. And then you come to realize he knows that Buffy is this teenage girl who's been chosen to be the new vampire slayer, to take on the forces of evil and the forces of all the vampires. And so Donald Sutherland eventually reaches out to her and has to train her. Rutger Hauer, the great actor who you may know from Blade Runner and so many other films, played a lot of villains. He is indeed the villain, the great vampire Lothos, who's been around for centuries in this film. And my favorite is actually Paul Rubens. You might know more as Pee Wee Herman. He plays the character of Amelin, who's Lothos' like right-hand vampire, and he. This was kind of an important moment because, unfortunately, prior to this, Paul Rubens had a big scandal where there was kind of a sex scandal that happened with him, and this was like the first big job that he had after that brought him back, and he's really funny and great in the movie. And then, as every 90s teen movie has, it's got a cast of a lot of great up-and-comers. You've got Hilary Swank as one of Buffy's friends, Kimberly, and kind of becomes a rival in the movie. She's so fantastic in this movie. You've got David Arquette as Pike's best friend. You've got an actor named Sasha Jensen, who's also in Dazed and Confused, which came out the year later. You've got actors like Natasha Gregson Wagner, and then Thomas Jane actually, I think, kind of appears like I don't even know if he has any lines. And then the weirdest one is there's a big basketball game toward the end of the film, and Ben Affleck is the star player of the rival team. I think he has like one line. He just randomly Ben Affleck pops up in this movie. So yeah, and then basically Buffy is the quote, like the prototypical 90s teen, with all the 90s lingo and the slang, a lot of like original like words that Joss created to kind of create this vernacular that the teens have. And then eventually she does realize, based on these dreams that she's been having and based on Merrick coming and talking to her, that she has been reincarnated. She had existed in other lives. She is the slayer who has to take on the vampires. And eventually she starts kicking ass, learning all kinds of cool martial arts moves and taking on vampires. And it's an adventurous comedy with a lot of teen stuff. So those are and now again, I think this movie represents the 90s because it was one of the first. It was early in the decade, but it really is that satirical, funny, goofy take on the 90s and on high school. So those are our two movies today. Next segment that we're going to get into here. Actually, before we do that, Brooklyn, do you have any thoughts based on what you've heard so far? You haven't seen either of these movies.
Yeah,
so
I haven't seen either of these. I did not realize Buffy the Vampire Slayer was a film first.
Wow,
that is news to me. But yeah, like on paper, these sound really good. Like, where can these movies go wrong? Yeah. But yeah, to factor a couple things, Ben Affleck was in Buffy the Vampire Slayer. He had an uncredited role of basketball player number 10.
Yep.
And you were correct in that Thomas Jane was in Buffy the Vampire Slayer. His role was, I have it here. He was Zeph, but he was credited as Tom James. So like a semi change on his name. But yeah, just crazy to hear all these different actors that were in these B movies.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. All right. So the next segment we could do is called the Nostalgia Review. So this is where we jump back to our young selves and basically give the review that we would have given when we saw the movie for the first time. So we'll start again with RJ. RJ, when did you first see Grease 2, and at what age, and what was your review of the movie at that time?
So I want to say, first of all, sorry for falling out again. I hate my computer. But I want to say I was maybe still around childhood age. I don't think I was yet a teenager. I want to say probably around like 9 or 10 years old. Man, where did I find it? I want to say actually I found this movie on TV. It wasn't even something that someone had. I think I ran across it on TV like there's a Grease too. I love Grease. You know what? It was because it was a marathon. Some channel was showing both of them. So Grease was on, and then like I saw on the TV guide afterwards, I'm like, Grease 2? What? So obviously I watched it, and I just loved it. I love the idea of like, okay, we're coming back. I thought it was 1 year later. I was under the assumption that it was just the next year, but okay, it's 2 years, whatever. But I like the idea of, oh, this is Sandy's cousin, you know, because it kept it. You know, as a kid, you wanted that connection of like, how am I supposed to care about all these new characters? Oh, okay, it's Sandy's cousin. The main guy's Sandy's cousin. And I like the idea of like, oh, they switched it. Like now the guy is the outsider and the girl is the cool one, trying to like and they're trying to find that romance in there with them. And I thought it was really cool. The musical numbers, I mean, oh my god, they were so great when I was a kid. I mean,
Really?
all the yeah, like I ignoring all the sexual innuendos in all of them. I mean, it was
Did
just,
you not catch any of that stuff, do you think, as a kid? Because it's through the whole movie, man.
the only one that was like, oh, okay, I see what you're doing there, like reproduction, you can't ignore that. That's exactly what that was, and they made it very obvious during the performance. Do it for our country was the one that I did not really clarify as a kid. I was like, okay, I get it now.
Just to clarify,
we're gonna score. I didn't get that one. We're gonna score tonight. I did not get that double entendre.
Dude,
I did not. I was
songs double entendre. Yeah, but just to kind of clarify, procreation is a song that they sing in biology class when they're learning sex ed, and they all break into this number of procreation, and then we're doing it for our country.
Reproduction.
Reproduction. I'm sorry. And then we're going to do it for our country is this was in the early 60s when the nuclear scare, the Cuban Missile Crisis was about to happen. All that stuff was going on. So there's a scene where two of the characters go into a bomb shelter, and the guy's basically trying to talk the girl into having sex so they can start like repopulating or whatever. And we're going to do it for our country.
That sounds like a bad Family Guy episode. Did you see Chris and Meg in the classroom? How do we learn about reproduction? He's just like, well, let me explain it to you in song. They go into this big show-stopping number.
I could definitely see a Grease 2 Family Guy episode. I think that makes sense.
And then we're gonna score tonight is all the main characters are out at a bowling, so we're gonna score as in the game, but we're gonna score tonight as in we're gonna get some. And then Ben, like, is there any other song not in that movie that's not about getting it on? There's almost Prowlin' is obviously about that. Like we're that one was obvious. Like, okay, we're gonna go pick up chicks. Like, obviously.
Yeah. Even Cool Rider, is a girl singing about how she's into the bad boy and she wants to ride his motorcycle.
Yeah, this movie is flowing with teenage hormones. Hence, it's a high school movie. So, but like I said, I mean, I love all the songs. I think I'll get into that later once we start getting to the negative stuff. But I love basically every song in this movie. Like, I just think it's so enjoyable. It's funny because it doesn't take itself too seriously. Like, it's meant to be this silly high school musical, and it's fun, and it still has that message that the original Grease has of like, still being true to yourself. Like, we're all gonna be friends forever as long as we stay in touch. And it gives all those nice little messages you kind of want to get when you're a high schooler getting ready to go on to that next part in life. So as a kid, I enjoyed the hell out of it. It was a really nice, for me, it was a very nice sequel.
And basically the lead character, Michael, is almost kind of like a nerdy guy out of town that feels out of place. And it's about him like basically getting the girl. So I think that's your classic kind of wish fulfillment, like young.
Of course.
So I think that, is really appealing if you're a young person watching this movie.
Oh yeah, of course. That's always appealing.
Yeah. Okay. So that's RJ's take for what he thought as a kid of Grease 2. For me on Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So I was actually 13 when this movie came out. I remember it coming out. I remember everyone kind of talking about it. I didn't see it in the theater, but it came out on VHS. And I remember watching it multiple. I think I rented it a bunch of different times just because I thought it was so funny and so fun. But it's actually, I had two female cousins that they were like kind of like my best friends. I went over to their house all the time, and they were obsessed with this movie. Like they had this movie memorized. There's like maybe a little later on when people were watching Clueless over and over and memorizing all the dialogue in this movie. This is what Buffy was for my young cousins. I think they were like 10 and 12, and then my older cousin actually named her cat Buffy because of this movie. That's like, and yeah, so this is one that we would always get together and quote to each other. And yeah, I always enjoyed this movie, and I think, it's a kind of like Grease 2. Buffy taps into that idea of you have this identity in high school, whether like for Buffy's character, you're the girl, you're the it girl, you're the airhead, you're the blonde, like you're the cheerleader. She's the head cheerleader in the movie. You're everything that society kind of tells you that you are. And then you have Luke Perry's character, who's kind of like the grunge guy, the burnout guy. Get the idea? You're not even sure if he goes to school or has he graduated. We're not sure. Like maybe he dropped out. He's a mechanic. Like he works in a mechanic shop, and like these two characters shouldn't be together. They're from different worlds, and they have their kind of place in society. But the movie shows that you're not what society tells you are. And Buffy is this totally different. There's this different person inside of her. And I think Christy Swanson, really appealed to me. I mean, obviously we're going to talk about Sarah Michelle Gellar later, but I think Christy Swanson really did, I think maybe even better, at the beginning convince you that she's this blonde airhead, and then later on convince you that she's somebody that has this drive to do something great, to be something great. When she is doing the physical actions and learning how to kick butt and doing like the training montages like Rocky style, she convinces you. And I think she's got a little more weight, not quite as thin as Sarah Michelle Gellar. So I really kind of buy in once those sequences start happening. I buy into it. And Luke Perry, we knew him for 90210, and he played kind of a similar character in that. But in this movie, I think he really has some depth, some charm, some humanity to him. And I think their relationship really does come across later in the film. And all of that just resonated with me, on top of the fact that this movie is really funny. Like Grease 2, this movie does not take itself seriously. This is a movie that really is a comedy before everything else. And it's really light. The story is, just kind of your standard, ABC, hero character has to take on the villain story, and then just plays a lot of humor, a lot of teen humor, a lot of jokes, a lot of horror movie satire, all of that around the edges. And it's a light movie, and when you're 13 years old, like, that's exactly what you want. You want a movie that's light, that's fun, that you can have fun with, that you can quote, and then you can get a little bit of empathy with the characters. And if I had to give, like, at 13, if I had to give like one line of this movie, it was, man, I love Buffy, man. I hope that I can end up meeting a girl like her in high school, because I was just a freshman. I was just starting out. I'm like, man, Buffy is awesome. I hope that there are cool chicks like her. All right. So that's going to end that segment. Again, I'll go to Brooklyn, see if you have anything else to add before we move on here.
So yeah, like I was writing down some notes here as you guys you were doing your kind of your nostalgic reviews and like the thoughts that I had. So like for Grease 2, like I like how they do this like this gender swap kind of thing.
Yeah,
I think that was kind of a actually a somewhat bold approach, but I think it was a risk that could have paid off dearly. But the just galore, like, and I feel like because of that, I would be curious to see like if Jeremy was 13-year-old when he saw Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I'd be curious how RJ felt when he was 13 and he saw Grease 2 for the first time, because I feel like that's really the audience that they're going for. Is that it's just like this very snickery like it's not right in your face, but it's just enough so that it's just kind of like the dirty humor that they kind of giggle at. But yeah, and then in terms of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, like it just like Joss Whedon is the writer of it, and it really reeks his kind of approach to it. Like he's very reminiscent of horror, like similar to how he was like way later on in Cabin in the Woods. But yeah, like the cheerleader-esque girl and the guy who's like, I'm not sure what, like kind of like a rebel without a cause, just like I don't know what I'm gonna be. I don't have an image, man. Just get out of my way. And yeah, like when you said like it doesn't take itself so seriously, like that just like to me that reeks 90s. So yeah, definitely a B movie that kind of fits that decade to a T.
Awesome. Okay. Well, our next segment is going to be what I call taking the nostalgia goggles off. So this is where we have to take a look at our own movie, the movie that we chose, and we have to imagine that we never saw it as a kid, we have no background with it, and we're watching this movie for the first time. What would we really think now watching this movie? Do we have criticisms, or do we maybe think we would love it as much? So again, let's keep it going. We'll start with RJ. So RJ, imagine that you were just catching up with Grease 2 now. You just saw it for the first time. Maybe you knew Grease, but you didn't know Grease 2. What do you think your thoughts would be on it if you came to it fresh?
Well, coming to it fresh, like I said, still the fact that I would think it's too convenient, surprisingly. I'm
sorry, RJ, we're getting a little bit of an audio issue.
Yeah.
Is that better?
Try again?
Can you keep talking?
Is that better?
No. Try hopping out and then hopping back in.
Yeah, just real quick. So
just getting some stats right now for when they eventually happen.
Absolutely. All right. Yeah, you're good.
Okay. So anyways, like I was saying, as much as I said that as a kid, I look for the connection of like, oh, okay, this Michael guy is supposed to be Sandy's cousin. That's cool. As an adult, I find it too convenient. Yeah. I'm like, really? Now all of a sudden her cousin's here, so now we're gonna follow her cousin. Cool, whatever. That was something that I automatically critiqued. The T-Birds being a biker gang. Where did that come from? That was my first thing.
Yeah, like, they were more into cars in the first movie.
Exactly. Right? Like, I don't know if like it's supposed to be like the change, like in this 2-year change, now we do bikes instead of cars. I don't know if like
60s.
Exactly. I wasn't born in the 50s and 60s, so I don't know where the transition from having a badass car to having a badass bike was the difference. It's it has a lot of side stories. There's a lot of things going on in this movie. If I have the biggest critique, it's that. But I can't really knock that because, like, they tried to make the core Pink Ladies and T-Birds the focus of the movie, and rather than leaving anybody out, they tried to give everybody their own story. And it almost worked. It just feels a little bit too crowded at times.
Yeah.
But
do you feel like you like all the characters likable, or you think some of them kind of miss?
No, because they gave them the right amount. It's 5 guys, 4 girls. You kind of make them all different enough to where, okay, they all have their own little thing going on, so you don't feel like anybody's just there to fill space. Well, maybe a little bit. The one guy, Davey, the one who rides in the sidecar of Goose's bike. I'm like, okay, maybe you were there to fill space. You were just like, we need a 4th T-Bird. Let's throw in Davey. But other than that, it was I actually really liked that. At first I didn't like it, but then I really thought about it. That Balmuto was still in high school. I like that because I was like, at first I was like, how does that make sense? And then we're like, oh wait, he's a delinquent. It actually wouldn't be surprising if 2 years later he's still in school at another school and just continues to F with the T-Birds at Rydell High. Yeah. Although he has a much bigger gang than he did in the first movie. but I didn't mind that too much. Michelle Pfeiffer was fantastic.
Yeah. Did you like
I thought,
I'm sorry, they brought the principal and those characters back?
oh yeah, of
Did you think
course.
they used
Like,
those characters well in this one?
maybe not so much Frenchie. They
Mm-hmm.
they I think they kind of just they needed to give someone Michael to talk to.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was her point. So I think she served it. Would I have liked a little bit more from her? Yes, but I understand why they used her like that. But I love Michelle Pfeiffer in it. I still think she's really good in it. I was surprised it was her first starring role when I looked
Yep.
that up. I was like, wow, like I didn't know that. So, and then the year right after this, she did Scarface. So,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that tells you how quickly she jumped into everybody's attention, and who knows if this movie did it or not. But, and then, I wanted to like Michael. Sometimes his character just feels kind of like two dimensional for me.
Mm.
Um,
And then you
and
said
then
maybe not all the songs did it for you.
yeah, the actually his solo I can't stand. Charade. I can't stand it. I don't know why. Like it's obviously supposed to be his version of Hopelessly Devoted to You.
Mm-hmm.
Like that was supposed to be his like here's your solo number like take it away. And I just don't like it. Like I like the other songs cuz I adore the other songs. I really do. A lot of these songs are very guilty pleasure for me. I can sing most of them. But yeah, that song just doesn't do it for me. And then the ending song kind of too. I'm like, y'all could have done a better job with this ending song. Yeah, it's hard to top. We go together. Don't get
Yeah.
me wrong. It's hard to top that closing number. And then of course, the most obvious of like, oh look, we're gonna like walk the same way that they did in the other movie, like hand in hand, like we're in some weird can line. Like I was like, no, why did you have to imitate it? Y'all were doing so well of like not imitating Grease, and then you did that. Like then you're like, yeah, let's throw this in there. Nah, it wasn't good. But other than that, I still think it's a very serviceable movie.
Mm-hmm.
Is it like to me? It is a serviceable sequel. Like I said,
Okay.
it's obviously a cash grab, but it's not a bad one in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
It's what it is. It's cash grab. Did it make me want to go watch it simply because it was Grease's sequel? Yeah, but did I regret watching it? Absolutely not.
Okay. So some criticisms, but still overall positive. Looking back at Grease too. All right, and then for me, my if I saw Buffy for the first time, I think I got to start with the movie's number one critic, and the movie's number one critic is Joss Whedon. Now, Joss Whedon had written the screenplay, and he sold it. And then he was brought in when they started making the film he was on set a little bit, and he was involved. But at a certain point, it became clear that they weren't making the movie that he really wanted. They took a lot of the darker elements out of it. There was a whole thing in the script where Merrick, the Donald Sutherland character, actually ended up killing himself because he couldn't feel that he could shoulder the burden of being a watcher anymore, and that it was just everything was too much for him. And they changed that. They give it a traditional the villain kills him thing, like an Obi-Wan Kenobi sort of thing. And they took out, there was more like Joss Whedon, even more of his lines and his dialogue in the original movie, took a lot of that out. The studio didn't think that it would play. And it just wasn't his original vision. And then another little side note, he really didn't care for Donald Sutherland. He felt that Donald Sutherland was kind of difficult on set and like improvised too much and mumbled and did things that he didn't like with that character. And he still to this day like smack talks Donald Sutherland and how he thinks he ruined Buffy. And I think his overall view looking back at it now is that, that's a version of Buffy, but it's not really Buffy. The Buffy that he really wanted to introduce to the world is the one that eventually he did bring as the creator of the TV series later on. So I have to bring all that out, and I do, to some degree, it's hard to disagree. You know, I loved the TV series. I've seen every episode. I watched it at the time. Didn't see the whole thing. Went back and did some binge watching, and I do think it's one of the greatest series of all time. And I think it really takes this character of Buffy and, you know, rises her to the level of a superhero, of an icon, of a role model for women, for people in general, of what we can be and what we can strive to be. And I think that Michelle Gellar really rose that character to that level. And it's hard, you know, to go back to the movie now, knowing that, having that knowledge, and kind of enjoy the movie at the same level. And obviously, again, this was the Buffy that Joss wanted. This was the Buffy that Joss wanted to bring to the world. So going back and looking at this jokey kind of 90s movie, it does take a knock looking at it from that level. And again, when the movie came out, didn't get very good reviews. It was a moderate hit, wasn't huge, but, you know, I think it's one of those ones that did throughout the 90s have a cult following. It did have a fan base, like I kind of mentioned anecdotally with my cousins. Like, people did love it, but I think it kind of became forgotten once the TV show hit. I think once the TV show hit, everyone thought, well, that's Buffy. And I think a lot of people have kind of forgotten the movie. So, yeah. I still really I think if I watch it now, and it really had been like 20 years since I've seen it, so rewatching it, I was coming to it pretty fresh, and I really do think it's a good movie. I mean, if you can take all that other stuff out of your head, I really do. I think it's a funny movie. I think that it has its own thing and it has its own identity. I think that the cast is so fun. I think that, you know, people like Hilary Swank is so great in this movie. Like, she's this, like, she's Buffy's friend, and then she kind of like gets jealous of Buffy, and then later in the movie something traumatic happens and she's all like and then I love her. Paul Rubens, I just think he's so funny. And like, the one scene that I always remembered that is like the iconic scene for me is when he's killed and he does this hammy death scene where he's like, ooh, oh, he's got the stake in his chest. He's like, oh, and he's just dying, and he keeps dying. And then they actually do like a, you know, before it was really a thing to do like a post-credit scene. First, there's a scene where they're getting interviews from all the teenagers, like on the local news, with all the crazy stuff that's happened, and that scene's really funny. And then there's more credits, and then you get the post-credits of Paul Rubens still doing his death scene, and it's so funny. I think Luke Perry's really good in the movie. I kind of rediscovered him on the TV show Riverdale as Archie's dad, and I realized, hey, this guy's really talented. And going back and watching this movie, you can see, you know, this guy always had talent, and he really knew how to play this to kind of, he's kind of that dreamy, hunky guy that we all knew from TV, but at the same time, he's kind of making fun of it. Grunge was hitting, so he's bringing in some of that stuff. Love the supporting cast. David Arquette. Stephen Root, you may know. He's been in a million things. He's Milton in the movie Office Space. He's the principal in this movie, and he's out of touch, and he's like trying to give people detention as people are being killed by vampires. He's like, you got detention, you got detention. It's so funny. This is so many goofy, silly things, and this movie doesn't take itself seriously. The one, probably my biggest complaint with it, that again, you could see the difference from the TV show, is that it doesn't really sink its teeth into the vampire stuff. It's just kind of your basic, oh, they got fangs and they fight, and they don't really do anything that cool. They don't really get into much of the lore of the vampires. And Rutger Hauer, though, he's always great, and I think he's really fun and great as the villain in the movie. Could have done more with him. Could have made him a little scarier. Could have, like, the sexual stuff going on between him and Buffy, like the tension there. They could have done more with that. But again, this is a light movie. They weren't trying to really go there. They were trying to keep this at a teen, goofy, silly, satirical, fun thing. And I think if you take the movie on that level, and you admire like Christy Swanson's performance and how she does kind of play it silly, but there is enough of that heart, enough of that edge, enough of that reality to her, especially later on in the film. And like, you know, she has to kind of give up her first boyfriend and get away from him and her friends. And kind of, she gets this new family that she sort of adopts with American Pike and everything else. And if you see that arc with her, it has enough weight to it that I think it brings something more to this silly movie that kind of lets you sink your teeth into it. And I think it really works. And I think you want a fun 90s teen movie. Buffy the Vampire Slayer is good. Just, you know, the TV show was a different thing, and the TV show had different identity. Take the movie on its own terms. I still really like it. All right, so that is our modern day reviews, our nostalgic goggles off reviews of our two movies. Once more, I'll go to Brooklyn before we get into our last segments here.
All right, so yeah, so just once again, some notes here that I took during the reviews. the one thing, like the first thing that I mentioned that I want to talk about in RJ's review, it is that he went on about how Michael, like him being Sandy's cousin, being part of the school, how that was really convenient. That happens in a lot of movies, and it's one of the flaws that often gets like overlooked. It's like, oh yeah, that's gonna happen. Like take for instance, like Pacific Rim 2. John Boyega is Idris Elba's son, but in the first movie, Idris Elba never mentions that he has a son.
It was also a sitcom thing, by the way. Like in season 5 of a show, they would bring in somebody's cousin to try to have a new cast member. Like, it was just always the cop-out thing.
Yeah, and then he mentions stuff about side plots, and then how it seemed like it more so tried to be an ensemble movie, whereas as opposed to just the main two characters. So maybe it was just kind of a failed attempt at that. He mentioned that there were some aspects from the first movie that they kept in. And then yeah, like the general theme that I got from this was sequelitis. They just tried to rehash that same concept, do a couple tweaks to make it different, but it just kind of didn't. It didn't work out the way that they wanted to. But yeah, they're getting on to Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Like, it's when Joss Whedon is its own, when Joss Whedon the writer is itself its critic, that's saying something. And I think even more so when comparing Grease 2 to Grease, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, it's harder to keep their blinds on, because you're always like, if people were to watch it now, they're always going to compare us to the TV series. It seemed like there was maybe some studio involvement, because it seemed like Joss Whedon wanted to make it darker, but the studios were like, well, let's play it safe here with like this 90s like kind of lighthearted comedy that was kind of the trend at the time, and you wouldn't really see this darker trend until like the late 90s, early 2000s. But yeah, like you mentioned as well, with Donald Sutherland, how he was being kind of a dick. That's always unfortunate to hear. Fun fact: Donald Sutherland is actually from St. John, New Brunswick, Canada. About a 4-hour drive for myself, and I think about the same for Alex. But yeah, it just like for that one again, it seemed that they tried to play it safe, where they could have taken more risks, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right, so our next segment is what I like to call Mr. Nice Guy. This is where we have to take a look at the other guy's movie, and we can only say nice things. So I'm actually going to switch it up, and I'm actually going to start this time, because we've been going to RJ a lot. So there were a little behind the scenes. Before we did this episode, RJ and I had a talk, and I basically told him that I'd never seen Grease 2. You would think, me being the 80s guy, I would have seen this movie at some point, and I actually never had. And there was a reason for that, and it's I gotta kind of confess here. I'm probably gonna piss a lot of people off. Just being totally honest, the reason that I had never seen Grease 2 is because I don't like Grease. I never liked Grease. It's something that I probably would call anti-nostalgia, which is that Grease was kind of shoved at me as a kid. Like, I was forced to watch it by a lot of relatives, and people are always watching it. And I just didn't get it. I thought that I saw like a school play version of it, and I enjoyed it. And I thought like the movie was this big, over the top, like 45-year-olds playing high school students. I just didn't like the movie version of it. I didn't really like John Travolta and Olivia Newton-John. It just, for whatever reason, it never resonated with me. So of course I wasn't going to watch Grease 2, which I always heard was like the bastard redheaded stepchild sequel that is like, some people don't even consider canon. So of course I was going to watch that, but RJ loves it, and I've heard about it. You know, it is one of those cult musicals that's definitely gathered a following over the years. So I finally sat down to watch it, and RJ, I really liked it. I really like Grease 2. I'm really glad that you forced me to watch it. I actually got to totally disagree with you. The reason that I liked it more than anything else is because I really did like Michael. I liked this character who was, you know, this guy that came from out of town. And he saw this girl who, you know, was different. She's the tough girl. She's kind of leads a gang. And he likes this girl. And, you know, it's funny because it's kind of like you think it's going to go the wrong way, where he like becomes he like has to try to be a biker and be tough and everything. And it's probably going to be like a bad message of don't be yourself, try to be something that you're not. But I think the movie kind of plays it well, because you know, he does something. He tries to become a bike rider. He tries to learn how to ride a motorcycle. It's really hard, and he falls over and he gets hurt, and it's something that he really struggles with. But he keeps at it because this is something that is important to him. He wants to do this, and he not only does he become a good bike rider, becomes like the best bike rider of all time, and he almost becomes like this mythic hero in the town. And the movie almost really becomes kind of like Spider-Man. Like I felt like I was watching Spider-Man, where he's this mysterious biker with a helmet over his head. No one knows who he is. And then at school, like he's still too awkward to actually tell her that he really is that guy. And she thinks he's just, you know, the British kid who's, you know, goofy or whatever. And he's got that inner struggle. And I think they play it well. Like this is somebody who found another, like, because he had this desire, he found another side to himself, and he kind of pushed himself to be something different. And I think it's actually becomes a good message. Like, go outside of your comfort zone, try different things, try to do something different than what you've been before, and awesome things can happen. And Michelle Pfeiffer, you said, she's so great. Like, she was a just instant star. She really is, I think, the key to this movie. And yeah, I just thought it was likable. And, you know, again, I think it still had, you know, maybe that problem of older people playing teenagers, but I just, for whatever reason, I just found them more likable. I found the world that the movie creates a little, it felt a little more like it hit me a little more than the first Grease. Like the first Grease for me feels like, people kind of playing dress up, whereas I feel like this one, I felt like, you know, these characters became a little more real for me. They're a little goofier, a little sillier, like I think teenagers are, and I just think I kind of got into the spirit of it. Yeah, there were a couple songs. I actually really liked the last song, and I enjoyed Procreation. I liked Cool Rider. A few of the songs in there I thought were pretty good. I liked the supporting cast overall. Eddie Deason, who came back from the first movie, pops up a couple times. He's kind of that, if you would know him if you saw him. He's kind of the goofy guy. He's got the, hey, I'm Eddie Deason kind of voice. He has like a few funny lines. And I thought, yeah, the returning cast members did good. And overall, I enjoyed the movie. And, you know, I have some other things to say, but we'll get into that later. So, all right, let's go to RJ and let's see if you can say anything positive about Buffy. What do you have to say about Buffy the Vampire Slayer?
Damn, I thought I was going to be able to think of something nice to say while you were doing all that
come
talking.
On.
No, I'm
Really?
just messing. I'm
Come
messing
on.
with you. It was. Sorry, just give me a
Don't
second.
play me like that, RJ.
Um,
He's still April Fooling me. Is what's going on. You're gonna pretend there's nothing good in this movie.
oh God, I wish I was pretending.
Oh no. Breaking my heart.
It was like, okay, I can imagine seeing this as a kid and finding it hilarious. I can admit that.
Mm-hmm.
That, like, if I was a kid sitting in the theater watching this movie, I would have found this movie hilarious. It's probably the nicest thing I could say about this movie.
Nothing to say about the actors or
Oh, so much to say about the actors, but not you want to hear in this section.
All right. Okay, so wow, that hurts, man. Okay, so
Sorry.
if you were a kid, you would find it funny. Okay, there you go.
Yeah, like I could see for what it was, like the teen comedy. Had I seen it at the appropriate time, I might have found this movie hilarious.
Okay. All right, so that's gonna finish that very quick segment of Mr. Nice Guy, and now this is the meat of it, guys. We're getting into it now. This is the section that I call the open floor, and this is where we get to open up about the other guy's movie and just unload and say what we really think. And I know he's got a lot to say. I'm just gonna let him go. RJ, let me have it. What do you think of this Buffy the Vampire Slayer movie?
I'm going to tell everybody right now exactly why Jeremy loves this movie. Mm-hmm. This is not a 90s movie. This is an 80s movie that was made in 1992.
I disagree. Go ahead.
This is an 80s movie that was made in 1992. All they did was change a few of the references and teen dialogue to match 90 kids instead of 80s kids. But this is an 80s B movie without the slightest of a doubt. And that is why Jeremy is in love with this movie. I'm sorry. Every other movie Jeremy has made me watch for this show feels exactly like this movie. the terrible lead actor, the
What?
the overuse of the teen lingo. I mean, I was like,
Come on.
no teenager says totally and cool and whatever this much. No teenager actually does. I don't care.
Like Clueless. Like they're coming up with this lingo to be fun, to be satiric.
Even in Clueless, no teenagers talk like that.
Yeah, that's why it's fun.
But no, that could have easily been an 80s movie had it come out 3 years earlier. And you wouldn't have batted an eye. You would have not even said this movie belongs in the 90s. You would have probably been saying this is an 80s movie gold.
Way closer to the spirit of Clueless and Can't Hardly Wait and movies like that, honestly. I got to really disagree with you there, but go on.
No, this is so close to Fast Times at Ridgemont High. So close to what's that other one? What's that other one I always watch? The one high school movie, the one 80s high school movie that I've seen that you haven't.
What?
Like, no, this is an 80s movie trapped in the 90s. That's exactly what this movie is. And I challenge anyone watching this episode to go watch that movie and disagree with me. This is an 80s movie trapped in the 90s. That's exactly what this movie is. What else could I say bad about it? The action is terrible. Absolutely terrible. Those fight scenes were atrocious. I couldn't even look at them.
You think she's badass at all when she's doing all the training and everything?
No. Like when she's training by herself, yes. When she is actually fighting the vampires, it's abysmal. It's like, and I even admitted this to you in our first episode. It's almost Surf Ninjas bad. It's actually worse than Surf Ninjas. And that takes a lot for me to say. This is worse than Three Ninjas Kick Back. Like kind of action. This is terrible. In that first fight scene when he first takes her to the graveyard was terrible. That should have been like one of the most frightening scenes in the movie. And it was terrible. It was garbage. It was absolutely hard to watch. I was like, how the hell am I supposed to be threatened by these vampires who can't even fight right? And how am I supposed to be threatened? No,
you're missing the spirit of the movie, RJ. Go on.
The spirit of and the spirit of the movie is the 80s of it. They got this script in the 80s and couldn't get it made till the 90s. That's exactly what happened.
No, because 90s is you don't take anything seriously. That's the 90s. 90s is whatever, or we take it, we don't really like.
We're not going to talk about 80s taking things seriously when there's movies like the Pirate movie out there. We're not going to talk about movies taking things seriously.
That movie's sincere. The 90s is not sincere. The 90s is we're not sincere. Everything is we're making fun of everything, and we don't take anything seriously. And we have kind of like that Generation X attitude. That is what Buffy is. Buffy is teenagers, ha, vampires, ha. We don't take any of this stuff seriously. It's a satire. It's a joke. It's making fun of itself. That's the 90s, dude. That's Clueless. Clueless is let's take this girl Cher and have her say funny things and make fun of her and gradually get to like her a little bit. But that's the 90s. It's the spirit of what this movie is. And yeah, they don't take the vampire stuff seriously. It's not supposed to. That they did it later in the series, but in the movie, it's for fun. It's to laugh at. It's to be.
I'm sorry, man, but you keep trying to bring up
basketball. The vampire plays basketball, and it's silly and funny, and it's not supposed to be taken seriously.
Exactly. A vampire playing basketball. Let's see. Which decade also had another famous monster, a werewolf playing basketball?
But that was sincere. That was sincere. This is a joke on that.
Oh, God,
This is taking the laugh at that and like, look at how stupid that is. This is the 90s attitude.
Okay, no. Because you keep wanting to bring in Clueless. Anybody who watches Clueless, yes, knows that is the 90s. If you told someone that Buffy the Vampire Slayer came out in the 80s, I bet you no one would question it.
No,
I bet you if I said that movie came out in 1988,
there's a lot of 90s stuff here.
No one would question
it. Luke Perry, dude. Luke Perry.
So?
The 90s right there. This is total 90s.
Yes, but it was before the 90s TV. So, but it was still before all that, so no one would have known. If you would have told them it was made in the 80s, no one would have questioned it.
There's like 90s alt rock music. There's grunge music. There's
Like
90s
I said,
pop.
they,
It's
like I said,
and
they
the
made it
attitude of
90s.
the movie.
Yes, but which decade is known for throwing their current stuff into every movie they make?
Oh
And
yeah,
you've
the
admitted
90s
it
didn't do
yourself. That is the 80s.
90s did that, dude. Like even
And
like
90s
the
did it
90s
too.
teen movies were even more known for that, for the trendy music. Like that's what made those movies so great. Is the like
Hey, don't get me wrong. Yes, but you always talk about how the 80s will do that. And like I said, dude, I'm sorry. I have to call it like I see it, especially with how much you love it. This is an 80s movie trapped in a 90s body.
now
And you just can't see it.
I was a teenager in the 90s, dude. I was there for Nirvana and everything that happened in the 90s, and this movie is right there. This is right part of that. So, all right, before I start yelling about
How
Grease
dare
2,
you
anything else?
associate this with Nirvana? How
They
dare
dress
you?
like they're from Seattle.
Oh my
Like David
God.
Arquette and Luke Perry are wannabe Seattle guys. It's got that. That is part of this.
I'm sorry, man. This movie's trapped in the 80s.
Nah.
It needs to be
All
let
right.
go.
Anything else before I start yelling? You don't like Christy Swanson at all, huh? You just think she's terrible?
Yeah, no, I think she was just cute, and that's why they casted her.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry.
I
I think she was
Donald
cute,
Sutherland,
and that's why they
Rutger
casted her.
Hauer. What do you think about them?
Paul Rubin got annoying after a while.
No way.
Like, very annoying. I got sick of it maybe by like halfway through the second act. I was done with his character. Hated the villain, the actual main dude. Thought he was dumb.
Rutger Hauer.
I agree that Donald Sutherland was underused. I think he could have done more with that.
He's great. He's in it a lot. He's like,
Oh,
I think Joss Whedon didn't like him, but I think that he's.
I think he's completely underused.
Right.
I think he's completely underused as a character.
The wonderful scene where he comes to the high school and she thinks he's like a creep that is like it kind of plays like.
Who does that? Who stays and talks to the creep? Nobody does that.
That is
you know who does that?
Because
80s people. A
that
90s
on your
kid would not have stayed at that school and talked to that stranger. They would have ran and got an adult. Only an 80s kid would have stayed there and talked to that creeper.
It's a comment on like in the 80s they would have played that serious. In the 90s they actually play with the undercurrent of this guy could be a creep and this is seen as weird. Like they play all those levels to it. It's
where
and it's really
she literally
funny.
talks to him like a normal person. She doesn't even call
weird
him
about
out.
it.
She's just like, "Oh, are you looking for someone?
It gets really
yeah,
cringy.
sure, whatever." Like
all right.
a real thing would have been like,
to be real, dude.
Like, no, it's a horrible reaction. I'm sorry. It's terrible.
Right. Okay. All right. So I'm going to yell about Grease 2. Now, I said I
yell about it. I dare you.
I said I liked it, and I said I enjoyed it. That doesn't mean I think it was good. I think that this movie, like you said yourself, was a cash-in, and I'm sorry, I liked some of the songs. I don't think the songs are good. I think most of the songs in this movie are forgettable, and that's the one thing, even though I've never been a Grease fan, that's the one thing Grease has, is it has iconic songs. This movie, like, they're kind of funny, and it's got all the sexual entendres and stuff. They're not really memorable. They're not. I mean, even procreation, which is kind of fun, is kind of.
Oh my God!
grating.
It's called reproduction. If you say procreation one more time,
I'm sorry, buddy. Pre-reproduction. All right, reproduction is it kind of. It's a little. It gets on your nerves a little bit. It did for me. Like even though it was kind of funny, it wasn't the song that I was hoping it would be. This really awesome like cult song, and I just think it kind of gets on your nerves, and it's not a very good song. And that's true of a lot of this movie. Like the songs just they're not Grease level. You can tell they weren't able to get the songwriting team back, and I just think that. There was obviously, like we talked about how there were production problems with Buffy. There were way more production problems with Grease too. Like this movie from the beginning was riddled with problems. Like they were constantly rewriting the script. You talked about Frenchie, how they don't do a lot with her character. She was like in one version of the script and not in another version of the script. So she kind of drops out of the movie at a certain point because they started filming a different draft. I mean, it's a mess. And there's You talked about all the side characters and everything. It's muddled. It's messy. The movie, it bogs down at certain points. It's a little too overlong. It's just not a very well made movie. I think it's
I
in a
agree
way
with that. It is a little
it's a
long.
likable movie, and I think if you like kitschy stuff, you can enjoy it on some level, and you might, like I said, I liked the characters, but it's not a very good movie, and I think it's trying to do something that it doesn't achieve. It tries to be another Grease. It tries to create, like the 60s. What their intention was, they were going to keep this as a franchise, and they're keep going forward, and they were going to, like, each movie was going to be every few years. Eventually they were going to get to like the flower power, like rock and roll late 60s, and they're trying to build toward that, and they're trying to do, okay, let's do Grease in the early 60s, let's do that version of Grease, and let's kind of keep this thing going. And it bombed. It didn't hit. The songs weren't good enough. The film just wasn't well written. It wasn't well done enough. I mean, you could tell this director was in over her head a little bit. I mean, certainly the choreography is there. I mean, the choreography, you can tell it's the same choreographer as Grease, but it just, overall, it's a messy movie. And you talked about my movie being an 80s, like being an 80s movie, not a 90s movie. This is in no way an 80s movie. This is a throwback. This is a movie aping a movie that came out in the 70s, trying to be a sequel to a movie that came out in the 70s, and doing homage to culture from the 50s and 60s. This doesn't, nothing about this movie to me, other than maybe the sexual entendre stuff, screamed 80s. If you told me it came out 77, I probably would have believed you. Like, it does, nothing about this movie screams 80s. And even if you argue with me and say that Buffy the Vampire Slayer has more 80s to it than 90s, you gotta admit it has more like 90s stuff than this has 80s stuff. I mean, there's references, there's grunge, there's music, there's the attitude, the satire, the we don't give a shit sort of thing to Buffy that makes that movie what it is. Grease 2 is, let's do another Grease, and they don't really have an identity. They don't really have a take. It doesn't feel like we're doing something 80s or now. It's a throwback. And even if you enjoy the movie, and I certainly can see why people do enjoy it, it's a messy movie that I think was kind of fair to be criticized the way it was. And, maybe if they had done something on stage, maybe if there was another stage musical that they could have built off of or something like that, or maybe if they had waited maybe even a little longer to kind of come up with something. But this was rushed, man. They threw the songs together. They threw the movie together. They threw actors in there from the first movie without really thinking it through. And it's not a very good movie for me. I think that I think that my movie is a much better representative of its time and of vision, even though Joss feels that he was taken off the project and that it wasn't his vision. I feel like it was Fran Kazui's vision. I feel like she brought a nice frothy 90s take to that movie, and I think that it plays better than your movie does. All right, so we're going to have to end it there, and we're going to get into our final summations. I'm going to hold off on your Brooklyn because I know you probably have more you want to add, and we're going to do that at the end there. So
Sure.
Final summations, I'm going to go to RJ. Now, be as objective as you can. I know where you're going to go, but just be objective and say which of these two movies do you think better represents this decade and is the movie that people should take away. If they could only watch one of the movies, which movie should they watch, and which movie really is the movie that represents its time in a better way?
All right, you want to talk about how this thing doesn't represent the 80s. One, the motorcycles, because you always talk about how motorcycles were a really big thing in the 80s.
Not those kind of motorcycles.
Hey, still, changing from cars to motorcycles, to me, that's one reason to do it, because you wanted the teenagers to relate to them, you gave them motorcycles. Two, the amount of smoking. Come on! Nobody smokes that much. Every single character in this movie smokes cigarettes. Almost every single freaking character.
That's the 60s.
RJ, work in the kitchen, then come back to me.
But seriously, like I said, to me, Buffy's just too much of a mix of the 80s and 90s to me. And you want to talk about it represents it? Nothing represents the 80s more to me than, like you said, the cash grab. The 80s weren't known for these cash grab sequels. So for me, that enough in itself represents the 80s. And another thing about it is the overuse of the musical. I did the math. The original Grease, when it comes to songs actually sang by the cast, there was a musical number on an average every 15 minutes. Grease 2 had a musical number on an average of every 8 minutes. That's
you're saying
almost
this,
double.
this is
That's
a
almost
positive?
double the amount of songs.
That's why this movie is bogs down with all the too many mediocre songs. Sorry, go ahead.
It was a great amount of mediocre songs. How dare you? They are all memorable. I love every single one of those songs. They are the guiltiest pleasure of mine. But
Yeah.
like I said, I mean, in my honest opinion, Buffy just has too many 80s qualities to it that I wouldn't really call it a 90s movie other than the fact that its year is 1992. So I have to give it to Grease.
All right. RJ cast his vote for Grease 2. Big shock. And now we get to me with my final thought here.
Oh, and also, this is also why I vote for Grease. Watching Buffy the Vampire Slayer movie will ruin the show for you.
Oh,
Watching
come
Grease
on.
2 will not ruin Grease.
That is not true at all.
Wow.
I'm sorry.
Okay. I think Grease 2 did ruin Grease for a lot of people. I think a lot of people watched that movie and it soured Grease for them because it's a messy movie. It doesn't have the songs that are as good, and it's a cash in. And I think that this Buffy the Vampire Slayer in no way sours the TV show. I think Buffy the Vampire Slayer it's a different take. It's a sillier, it's the origin story, you know, which they hint at in the series. But yeah, I think that Buffy, for one thing, I think it represents the 90s a lot better than Grease 2 too. Just because they smoke and drive motorcycles. If they'd made the movie in 61, they would have smoked and rode motorcycles. That doesn't make it an 80s movie. There's no reference. There's nothing to 80s teens. Like, there's a reason it wasn't a big hit with 80s teens in 82, because like Fast Times came out that year, and that's the movie that people wanted. They didn't want Grease 2. This isn't a movie for the 80s. This is a cash in on something that was retro. Buffy the Vampire Slayer is a movie that was speaking to their audience. They were, hey, you think teenage stuff is stupid? You think horror movies are stupid? Like, there was a lot of, Mystery Science Theater was around the corner. Let's look back and make fun of this stuff. The vampire scenes were not well staged because vampires are dumb. That's what this movie is saying. Vampire stuff is stupid. Like, yeah, Teen Wolf was a movie in the 80s that had a werewolf playing basketball. That's stupid. Let's have our vampire play basketball and make the scene really silly and make fun of it. That this is a snarky movie, and this is what maybe there is a lot of 80s flavor to it. I'll give you that, but it is a snarky movie. It is a movie that is kind of always looking askance. It's almost like speaking to the audience, like, we'll have a scene and then they'll almost look at the audience and say, isn't this stupid? What about all this? What do you think about this? And yeah, they play all the Buffy stuff early in the movie to the hilt, like the way that those girls talk. It isn't realistic. It isn't how teenagers talk. It is like the criticism of how teenagers talked in the 90s. Joss made up new words to show how stupid that stuff is. To show
there were only 2 years into the 90s. How can you say kids in the 90s talk like that when we were 2 years into the 90s?
No,
he went with how the 80s kids talked.
That's not true, because you already were having 90210. You're already having all this new influx of culture that was separating itself from the 80s, and this was commenting. Yeah, I mean, it's commenting on teens in general. It's commenting on the lingo that teens use to talk to each other, and it's doing it in a way that's funny. And it's a witty, I think it's a funny movie. I laughed through it. I think the performances are fun. I never got tired of Paul Rubens. I mean, there's the great, I'm going to quote it here. There's the great scene where he says later in the movie, "You ruined my new jacket. Kill him a lot." It's just funny stuff like that you don't take seriously. There's a line at the end when they're doing like the interviews at the end of the movie. There's a line where the kid's talking to the news crew, and he says, "They had this look in their eyes, totally cold, animal. I think they were young Republicans." Like, this movie it's so funny. It's got so much snark to it. You don't take it seriously, and I think that, again, you got Clueless, you got all these other movies in the 90s that were developing this. This was one of the proto ones. So yeah, it's going to have some carryover from, a previous decade, because this is one of the first. But I think it really it is a succession. You've got this, then you go to Clueless, and you go to these other movies. It is that succession of the disaffected teenager who just kind of laughs at everything. This is who I was in the 90s. you'd sit in the back of the gym during the pep rally and, oh, this is so stupid. Look, those people actually into this. Like, they actually think this is what you're supposed to do. Oh, look at those jocks. Like, this is who we were in the 90s. And this movie is the beginning of that in teen cinema. This is the beginning of, it's all dumb. It's all silly, but let's have fun with it. And I think, again, I really disagree. I think that though Michelle Pfeiffer and those actors, do good in that movie, I feel like Christy Swanson in this movie really walks the line of being silly, the dumb blonde, but at the same time having a heart to her, and you do get in and you do relate to that character. And I think she plays a different character than Sarah Michelle Gellar does, and I think in some ways she convinces you more that she really is an airhead, that her name should be Buffy. I don't know that ever really landed with Sarah Michelle Gellar. Like, Sarah Michelle Gellar was already, this kind of darker character at the beginning of the series, and it just, they told us her name was Buffy. But with this, this girl is Buffy, and you see Buffy become Buffy the Vampire Slayer in this movie. And even though it is a movie that is kind of having a laugh, and even though, they don't take this vampire action seriously like they did later on in the series, I still get into that arc. And I disagree. I think the villain was fun. I mean, I think Rutger Hauer is so charismatic and so fun. And I think that he's so bored because he wants an opponent that he can fight. And I think that the way that he plays that boredom is really fun. And all the supporting roles, there's so much in this movie that's fun. And this really does tell you, this is where it starts. This is where the 90s teen movie is starting from, in the early 90s. It's a good portrait of that time, and it's a good portrait of who somebody like me as a teenager was in that time. So I absolutely cast my vote for Buffy. And though I do recommend checking out both these movies, Buffy, I think it's a shorter movie, it's a tighter movie, it's, to me, a funnier movie, and I think it's one that I would recommend first if you're going to check out one of these two. This would be the one that I think you should start with. So that's my vote. And now we're going to do it. We're going to go back to Brooklyn, who's kind of been our bystander here. He's going to have to cast the final vote here, give his final thoughts, and we're going to get a winner today of which of these two April Fool's picks is going to win the day today.
All right, so listening to the arguments and like kind of jotting down some notes, the general consensus that I got from both movies is that this is a continuation. These are both continuations of eras. Like, RJ harped on it very hard that Buffy is an 80s movie that was released in the 90s, and that how Grease 2 was essentially just a continuation of that 60s like diner kind of approach. The gripe that I got from Buffy was that it's almost too much tongue in cheek, where it's just like it's trying so hard to be like. It's similar to how like Austin Powers does his kind of stuff, where he has like a rude joke, and then he's like, oh, like he just like they almost acknowledge in the movie that the joke is rude. And then again,
very fitting comparison, by the way.
Very astute. and then with Grease 2, I wanted to fact check it, but there was no way I could have done it in time. But how there was 8 minutes, there was like an average 8 minute or 8 minutes in between songs.
No, I'll literally tell you the math right now. Actual numbers that consist of the cast. In the original Grease movie, there are only 8 songs that the cast themselves actually sing. The movie itself is 110 minutes. In Grease 2, there are 13 songs that members of the cast sing, and it is 114 minutes. So just do the math from that.
Wow. Yeah, and then I'm actually really surprised nobody brought up a box office numbers. I'll pull up. I have the numbers here right quick.
We never care.
Yeah.
We know that
actually, of the two, Buffy was the one that made money. Buffy was on a $7 million budget. It made $16 million domestic. It had a 4.5 opening weekend, and then Grease had very similar numbers, but it had almost doubled the budget. It had $13 million budget, then it made only 15 domestically. So it definitely lost money. But okay, yeah. Jeremy, I'm really sorry, but I have to go with Grease 2 because I feel like they're both trying to approach like a meta humor, and I feel like Grease 2 is slightly more subtle, just from the way that they were presenting it, and it's that in your face kind of tongue in cheek that doesn't really appeal to me. So yeah, based off of the arguments, I was more intrigued to see Grease 2 than I was to see Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
I guarantee if you actually watch these movies, you'll enjoy Buffy more. But
okay,
yeah, you haven't seen him, so you don't have that to go off of. All right, guys. So I'm going to say something I don't get to say very often, and that is that the 80s wins here today. And even though I wasn't on the 80s side, that always makes me happy to say those words. I always like saying the 80s win. And you know what? The 80s are going to keep winning because we're going to get off this April Fool's thing, and we're going to be back to normal with our next episodes. And I'm going to be fighting for my childhood, the 80s again. And RG will be back with the 90s. Eventually, we're going to get some 2000s in there, and we'll be back to our normal thing. But we're glad you were with us today with this April Fool's episode. Again, we teased it before, but our next episode we're planning to do is to have Mark the Canadian Nightmare Borch on and do the immortal superhero type movies, Howard the Duck versus Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, and that's going to get real happy.
Just give it up. Yeah. You're not winning.
I'm gonna give it a heck of a shot, and
you're going to lose.
No, I'm gonna give it a heck of a shot. I think Mark is gonna be maybe a little more torn than you might think. So anyway, it
doesn't matter what you think.
That's gonna be our next episode. Thanks again for tuning in, guys. Check us out, all our content on Full Metal Media. Check out the stuff that we do on Worldwide Movie Games. I'll go to Brooklyn. Anything you want to plug, Brooklyn?
Yeah, you can find me on Jack of All Trivia. I host 2 shows there. On Mondays, I run the Jukebox Division. That is everything and all things music. We are just about to do our championship on April 23rd. That is, of course, Luca versus Full Metal's very own Chance Ellison. And then you can find me on Saturdays doing the Weekend Rewind, where we cover all of the shows from Jack of All Trivia, as well as the Schmodown. And it's kind of our talk show.
Awesome. Yeah, check out Jack of All Trivia, guys. They got a lot of great stuff going on there. I've been binge watching all their Inner Geekdom trivia matches, pure geek trivia, and they're awesome. So, yeah. And the music trivia that Brooklyn does is really great too. And RJ, anything you want to plug or anything you want to say before we go today?
No, I mean it's always fun to be here. 4-1, just saying. gonna rub it in just a little bit.
Got a lot of episodes still to go, buddy.
Oh no, let me get that salt in there real quick. Come on. Oh yeah, just rubbing it in. But no, I mean, like Jeremy said, you can check out all our old episodes if you're interested. We have them all on. I believe we have them on a Worldwide Movie, right? Or do we have them on Full Metal?
Full Metal Media, and definitely check out that pirate episode for sure. Like, they're all good. But
check out the pirate one. If you want a good one to get more about this show, watch the pirate episode. That one was really fun. And then our first episode was also really fun too.
By the way, technically I'm 4-2 because I was on the 90s side on that, but whatever.
No. Yeah. I won. You're 4 and you're 1 and 4. No. I won. My movie won. You're 1 and 4.
My movie won too. My movie was your movie. You fool. All right.
Nah. Don't try to twist it. Don't try to twist it.
I'm not. I was fighting for Hook. Sandy was fighting for Pirate Movie. All right. Anyway.
Well, that's fair. Okay, that's fair. That's fair.
Thanks for checking us out today, guys. Check us out next time on Nostalgia Goggles. Jeremy the Adam Adams signing out. And again, put those nostalgia goggles back on.